what do you know about Shakespeare's early life?
Hmm. Well, William Shakespeare was a man who attended all the way up through primary school, but he did not go off to Eton or Cambridge or any of the fancy Oxford schools. So that's what makes him pretty controversial. His father was a glove maker. He didn't get the formal education, and so many critics or people who don't believe that Shakespeare actually wrote it, that's one of the things they often cite, was how can a man who writes so beautifully and so eloquently not have been as educated as many of his peers. And so that's one of the big brouhahas about Shakespeare, I guess.
How's his success compared to other playwrights?
Well, I think the very fact that our curriculum here at Torrey Pines shows how great his success is. Here we are in the 21st century, and you study at least 3 of his plays before you graduate from high school. You'll study Romeo and Juliet. You will probably study Taming of the Shrew in your sophomore year, and by senior year you'll probably either study Macbeth, Hamlet, or if you're lucky enough to do both. So, his fame can't compare. I mean, he's a genius, and we study not only his plays, but we also study so much of his poetry as well. And so compared to people of his time, while there are other famous writers around that time, certainly Shakespeare is the name that's universally known.
What did he contribute to English language?
Do you know he invented almost 25,000 words? And so that alone is amazing. So many of the metaphors that we use today, so many of the cliches that we use today, are still so much a part of our language. Something's rotten in Denmark, the Sound and Fury told by an idiot. So many novels use his phrases and words as their titles. So he was amazing. He was an amazing writer. And it just the fact, think about it, how many of us have invented a word, never mind 20,000 words that have incorporated in the language. It's my goal to invent one word that's used by the population, but I don't know if I'll make it, sadly.
How has his fame or influence changed since his time?
I think during Shakespeare's time, playwrights and actors in particular, and Shakespeare started out as an actor, and some people say that's why his plays are so well written, because actors love his plays because he writes for the actor. And they were really looked down upon. It wasn't a profession. They were often, they traveled in troops, and they were often thought of not much better than thieves. And so his fame, I wonder if, he certainly couldn't probably have ever imagined that his fame would be what it is today, that, he's studied in the great halls of our universities throughout the world. I think he probably could never have imagined that, because he really was the great entertainer, and that's what he looked for. And his plays were performed where they would throw apples and tomatoes by the groundlings. They would just throw garbage if it was horrible. So, it would be interesting to see if he came back to see his works in folios and displayed in museums. And, I don't think he really ever got that fame that he has today.
What are his plays like?
What are his plays like? That's the beauty of Shakespeare. He dabbled in all different genres. So his comedies are rollicking and funny, and he does tragedies, and he has history plays. And of course, there were the plays that are kind of the stepping stones. So you guys are studying Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet was really kind of his dabbling into tragedy, and it's called the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, but it doesn't really follow the strict tragic forms. But many would say something like King Lear or Hamlet are his great tragedies. So it's really interesting, if you study enough Shakespeare, to watch some of his early plays versus some of his much later plays, and to watch him grow as a writer. But he really did kind of dabble in all genres of drama, so that was kind of fun. I always say, though, his greatest tragedy is Taming of the Shrew, which is supposed to be which is supposed to be comedy, but it's all about breaking a woman's spirit. So it kills me as a feminist.
What was his writing style like?
Incredibly poetic, uses high imagery, but at the same time he could be raunchy. I mean, I'm sure as studying Romeo and Juliet, that whole sword scene where basically, excuse my language, but it's a pissing contest for men and their penises. It is, pretty funny and raunchy. So, here's a man who could write the most beautiful sonnets and the most beautiful images and ideas in that way, and yet he could make you just laugh with his kind of just raunchy and tawdry language as well. So, I mean, that's what makes us just so in awe of him, because he just had such a way with being comic and poetic and all the same time in one play. It's just what makes it amazing.
Those are all the questions.
So, who was Shakespeare?
He was an English playwright and poet.
And how many books of his have you read?
A lot. 6 maybe.
Can you please name them?
King Lear, Ursula Ansel, The Shrew. What?
Shakespeare.
This English playwright that we study in school, and I'm sure that we'll hear about in college and beyond. So, from my experience with Shakespeare, I've read Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and this year we read Hamlet and Macbeth. And overall, I have to say that if he did truly write his works, I know there's some controversy over who actually wrote Shakespeare's plays. If he did write them, he's incredibly talented, because I think that the themes and the way that the ideas are conveyed still resonate, even though it's so much later after his life.
So, who was Shakespeare?
Shakespeare was a writer that created a lot of the plays that we read today in English.
And how many of his books have you read?
I think books? Do you mean plays?
Or plays.
Yeah. I think I've read around 2 or 3 of them.
Which ones were they?
They were The Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet. I think I'm not sure if he wrote the whatchamacallit. It wasn't. It was like.
Yeah, it's that one.
No,
Who is William Shakespeare?
a writer.
Anything more specific? Okay. How many of
Mysterious being who disappeared.
Shakespeare's plays have you read?
He had 5 sons and daughters.
3.
Who is William Shakespeare?
He is a writer.
How many of his plays have you read?
It's like 2.
Okay. Which plays have you read?
Julius Caesar and Romeo and Juliet.
Who is William Shakespeare?
He was a writer who wrote plays. He was also an actor. In this,
How many of his plays have you read?
I've read 3 of his plays:
Which plays?
Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Romeo and Juliet.
Great. And again, who is William Shakespeare?
16th century.
How many of his plays have you read?
Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Tale of Taming the Shrew, whatever. Hamlet, Twelfth Night, Midnight Summer's Dream. It's like 6. I don't
It's on
know.
Midsummer's Night. Who is William Shakespeare?
He was an English poet in the Elizabethan era
Okay.
and playwright.
How many of his plays have you read?
I'll name them off: Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer's Night's Dream. Yeah, Taming of the Shrew, maybe like 5.
Thank you for your time. Who is William Shakespeare?
He's an English playwright who wrote lots of plays that we like. For example, Midsummer's Night's Dream.
How many of his plays have you read?
I have read like 4 or 5 in class, and then I've read like summaries for a few others, which is and I find them quite interesting.
So how many of his books, or who was Shakespeare, sorry?
Who was what?
Shakespeare. Who was Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Like playwrights?
Okay, yeah. And how many of his plays have you read?
Don't show me, you'll get an F.
It's more than 10, I think. I don't have an exact
What like
number.
fun facts can you name about him?
One of his children was named Hamlet.
was lagging
Born in Stratford upon Avon.
Who's Shakespeare?
Like William Shakespeare.